So our next assignment is something called Liquify Caricature. So we're going to be using a tool in Photoshop that actually, let me bring up Photoshop here, is a filter. It's one of the more involved filters though. So there's a lot of filters, we'll go over those later at some point, that you just kind of set them up with a few options. But some of these require working in them a lot more. And we're working in this kind of early in our Photoshop time because it's a little bit fun and it deals with pixels a lot. So we've been talking about pixels and how to deal with those. And one of the things we're going to have to do in this assignment is deal with the fact that things are getting stretched. So this is an example, starting with one and then kind of turning it into a caricature version of that character or of that person. And you can already see, even in one that's pretty well done, especially if you go onto Blackboard and you look at these on your own computer, there's a softness to this, right? So there's a crispness to this image, whether it's a detail in the hair, the wrinkles, the shirt lines, whatever, that as soon as you start mucking around with those pixels, it gets a little soft, it gets a little blurry. You can see it's hard to control making the shirt look correct. This down here is particularly not awesome. And then there's a softness to everything here. It does make it look a little less photographic, which is cool, but it's something I want you guys to get used to now that we're leaving Illustrator and moving into the realm of things that are pixelated. So I have an image here. You can go on to Flickr or Google somewhere, and as long as you set it to all Creative Commons licenses or reuse modification, you can come up with an image. And I'm going to go to Filter, Liquify, and it's going to bring up an entirely new window. And it's going to have tools on this side, and it's going to have settings for the tools on this side. We're not going to deal with most of these settings. This is not a tool that we need to learn a lot about, but we can have a few settings about the size of the brush, density, things like that. And I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller by using the bracket keys on the keyboard. You can see it if I press them, they're turning that up and down. And the first one that I'm going to use is actually just it's called the forward warp tool. I would just call this like the move tool. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag, and you can see it's dragging the pixels in the direction that I'm working. Now I'm working relatively slow. You can do that, but that's not very helpful. And one of the things I can do is start to reshape where things are, right? Gently. So one of the keys to working in some sort of tool like this is to work a little bit at a time. You can see how this would be very useful in the advertising industry with all the work they do, changing the shapes of people's bodies. So this is one of those tools that they would use to accomplish this. Certainly, I don't want to encourage that kind of nonsense. We're using it here just for a bit of a cartoony effect, something very silly, right? I can also, if I'm careful, I'm moving a little bit at a time, right? And aside from this eyebrow being a bit exaggerated, you might not know that it changed much yet. There's a button down here called Preview, and you can start to see how powerful this would be. I mean, this is a high-end version of this picture. Imagine if it was a smaller picture in a magazine with all sorts of effects on it for color, right? Then you can really start to see how this would change how people see an image. All right, so this is what the move tool does. I think they call it the forward warp tool. Skipping down a little bit, there's something called the pucker tool, and in any case, pucker means to kind of shrink in. I want this to be like there. When I do this, it's going to take all the pixels and shrink them down towards the center of the brush. I can hit Control Z to undo. I can turn the density of any of these up. And you can see it's kind of affecting a wider range, like kind of closer to the edge of where the bristles are, which is good because I want that. And then I can go back to my move tool. I want this to affect a wider range as well. Oh, the settings are by tool, so the brush size. Nope. I need that to be all the way up, and I need this to be 120. So you can see how I keep making a change and then undoing. And that's another sort of lesson I would like you guys to have, is that you can move things a little bit at a time. You can make changes and then decide, oh, I don't want that, right? You can change things around. The other tool is called the Bloat Tool, and that will expand pixels out from the center. So you can, make particular certain things a little bit bigger, basically. Now, I skipped some of these tools because I wanted to do some damage to this, right? I'm not happy with the nose at all. I managed to, and I'm unhappy with this too. So there's this Reconstruct tool. Now I can't do undo to fix the nose without going back and having all these other changes that I did after the nose, right? But I can use this Reconstruct tool. I can turn its pressure. Pressure is like how much it does a thing. I can turn the pressure down. I want the density up. I like my brush to be indicative of what's actually happening. And I can start to... I need a little more pressure. I can start to restore this portion, right? I can decide to do something different with the nose later. I can also gently bring these pixels back to where they were. Now it's not going to still make her look the same because I had changed this part of the jawline. Yeah, I still need to do a little bit to restore this. But you can tell it's a way to restore a particular section. Ooh. Image changed. Oh, yeah, my bad. There we go. It allows me to restore a particular section without changing the other things. So that's what the restore button is. The smooth tool, I'm going to mess something up a little bit, is kind of about averaging out. So if I make an extreme change, right, like this smooth tool will average out between those changes. And you can see here it's really reducing the change because it's averaging it between a big change and no change. But it's a way to, for whatever reason, kind of meld things together. Although I'm going to use the Reconstruct because I don't actually want her head to do that, and it was kind of warping things. But what I want you guys to do is just have some fun with this. Don't worry about this freeze and thaw mask stuff. We're not doing much with this. This is not going to be a thing that we're going to be using very often. I just want you to try to make some changes to this person. Make it a caricature, but do so in a way that kind of maintains image fidelity, right? So we don't want to see this. We want to see, kind of working with things. You can change their expression. You can change. I'm working pretty quickly, which means I'm getting sloppy. Yeah, that's no good. You want to make changes that, yes, we know it's been messed with, right? No one's face has these big of an eyes or anything like that. But we want it to be subtle enough that it looks like it was done with care and not just squashing a bunch of pixels around. When you are done, by the way, you would simply hit OK. And this is one of those things where it's sort of semi-permanent. So I brought in an image and it had this ridiculous web name on it. If I just save this, I lose the original image, which, what if I can't find it again? So I would say save as, and then call it, Liquify Portrait, and save it as a different file than the other thing. Aside from reverting to the original save or undoing the whole thing, there's no going back and forth between these things. These upper filters here, these are they're called destructive editing. We're going to talk about that more next time. But basically, there's no going back, which is why you should always have backups of your files and things like that. All right, but have fun. Be gentle. Remember that these are all human people. So there's nothing wrong with being a little bit silly, but we don't want to be, insulting. Even if their pictures are up on the web, free to use, with, proper digital copyrights for us for class. And you'll submit that with the rest of your stuff for this week.